Chapter 151. The Vault. What is the biggest strength of being a transmigrator who has read the novel in which they are transmigrated? There may be several answers to that question, and everyone might give a different one. Some would say it's knowing the plot, having foresight into the big events, or being able to predict major twists. But for me, the answer is clear. It's knowing the characters. The real advantage is understanding who they are, how they think, what drives them, and most importantly, what breaks them. I know their backstories, the hidden trauma that shapes their every decision, the subtle motivations they won't share with anyone else. Knowing what pushes them forward, what keeps them awake at night, is more valuable than any plot twist. It's like holding the strings to their minds. What makes them stronger? I know it. What makes them falter? I know those. After all, we're all reading these books to see someone different, yet someone familiar. That's the heart of it. Readers are drawn to characters they can relate to, people who might have different circumstances or powers but who reflect something familiar back at them. It's that connection, that sense of recognizing a part of themselves, that keeps them turning the pages. But here's the thing, if you can't understand the way the main character thinks, if you can't sympathize with them, meaning you can't find that spark of familiarity, you won't care. You'll put the book down and move on. The readers might say they want something unique, something exotic, but deep down, they're looking for that thread that ties them to the story. Something they can latch onto, some emotion or experience that feels real to them. On the other hand, people don't want to see too much of themselves in character. That's when it gets uncomfortable. A character who mirrors you too closely, who reflects your flaws and insecurities, those ugly sides of yourself you try to ignore, makes you face things you might not want to. It's like holding up a mirror, and most people don't like what they see when they look too hard. But there's one thing that is clear. When someone reads a book, they internalize the main character, or at least the point of view of the character they're following. It's inevitable. Oh, so he is acting like this? That's an interesting way to approach the problem. Maybe that's how I would handle it, or maybe not. Whether they realize it or not, they're stepping into the character's shoes, understanding the world through their eyes. And that's where the real advantage comes in. By reading about other characters, the reader is essentially seeing the world through someone else's eyes. They begin to understand different perspectives, and concepts that might have seemed foreign or difficult to grasp can suddenly start making sense when viewed from another angle. It's like having someone walk you through a maze you've been stuck in, offering insights that weren't clear from your own limited viewpoint. In a way, those characters become a kind of stepping stone on the reader's journey. Each character, with their unique experiences, strengths, and flaws, adds another layer to the reader's understanding, not just of the story but of life itself. It's not just entertainment. It's an opportunity for growth, for seeing things differently, for expanding your own thinking. You begin to realize that even if you disagree with a character's choices, or if they make you uncomfortable, there's still something to be learned. Their thought process and their way of navigating problems can offer solutions or perspectives that you hadn't considered before. And even when they stumble or fail, that too becomes part of the learning. That is why it weirdly is interesting to remember the chapters about some of the male leads. Shattered Innocence was, at its core, a romance fantasy novel. Not exactly the most highbrow piece of literature, but still, it had its moments. It wasn't well written, hell, far from it. There were so many inconsistencies with the characters that it became a running joke in my head. One chapter a male lead would be steadfast, rational, and loyal, and the next, he'd be impulsive, reckless, and frankly irrational. I used to think those inconsistencies were just bad writing. I'd chalk it up to the author being sloppy or not understanding their own characters. But now I wonder, maybe it wasn't just the writing. Maybe those inconsistencies were a reflection of my own narrow way of looking at life. Maybe those actions, the ones I would never do, make perfect sense to someone else. There's a reason why different people relate to different characters. While I might have found the male lead's actions nonsensical, maybe to someone else it was exactly what they would do in that situation. The impulsive choices, the reckless emotions, it all had a place in a story where people thought and felt differently than I did. Still, while I disagreed with how the male leads were written and with many of their actions, there was one thing in the book that I actually liked. It was how the concept of genius was explained. The detailed way of breaking down how a person with a talent thinks. That was something Shattered Innocence actually did well. It wasn't easy to pull off, but the writer nailed it in certain moments. One scene that always stood out to me was about the heir of the Mage Tower. Being a romance fantasy book, it was full of ridiculously talented male leads, all with absurd backgrounds and skills to match. But this one, the heir, was different, or at least the way his mind was portrayed was different. There was this particular episode where he explored a cave, hunting for a rare artifact. It wasn't some dramatic showdown or romantic entanglement. It was just him, alone, meticulously unraveling the secrets of that cave. The episode took its time, slowing down to show how his mind worked, how he observed the smallest of details that others would have missed entirely, how he had somehow sensed the mana different from others. What made his talent different was what made him the heir of the Magic Tower. They were all made use of. Is it the place? Vitalyara's voice echoed in my head at that moment. The reason, she asked. Well, the place we are in right now is not a usual place. I stood in front of the cave, the very same one described in Shattered Innocence. The one where the heir of the Magic Tower made his breakthrough to the 5th star realm. It looked almost exactly as I'd pictured it. The jagged rock formations, the eerie stillness in the air, and that unmistakable pulse of mana. Faint but undeniably there. Yes, that is, I said quietly, my eyes scanning the entrance. To most, it would seem like an ordinary cave, forgotten in the depths of time. But I knew better. I knew what lay inside, and more importantly, I knew what had happened here. I sense a really strong energy from down there. I took a step closer, feeling the subtle hum of ancient magic coursing through the cave walls. It was faint, but unmistakable, the kind of energy that could only come from something or someone extraordinary. There's no doubt about it now. This place is more than just a cave. Vitalyara murmured in my mind, her usual lazy tone replaced with a hint of caution. I can feel the barrier. Whoever created this didn't want it found easily. That would be Arlen Morrowind's work, I whispered to myself. The Archmage had been a legend, both feared and respected for his mastery of spatial and illusionary magic. He had left behind a treasure trove known as Morrowind's Vault, cleverly hidden from all but the most perceptive, and it seemed I had finally found its entrance. The barrier was subtle, just like how it was described in the novel. A near-perfect illusion layered over reality, meant to divert attention from all but those who knew exactly what to look for. The faint pulse of mana was the only clue. You won't be able to pass it like this. I held out my hand, letting my mana flow freely. The barrier flickered, rippling like the surface of disturbed water. I extended my hand, drawing upon the mana from deep within my core, feeling the familiar warmth of starlight mana swirl through me. It pulsed, gentle yet steady, the very essence of light pulled from the heavens, refined and focused. My breathing steadied as I concentrated, visualizing the process I'd read about in Shattered Innocence. The trick wasn't brute force. Arlen Morrowind's barriers weren't meant to be broken. They were meant to be unraveled. It's just like threading a needle. With a focused breath, I condensed my mana into a thin thread, glowing faintly with the shimmer of stars. I let it hover in the air for a moment, admiring the delicate craftsmanship of it, before sending it forward, allowing the thread to drift toward the invisible barrier. The moment the thread touched the barrier, it flickered, reacting to the intrusion. But I knew the secret. The key wasn't to force the mana through, but to weave it, guiding it along the natural flow of the barrier itself. I began the delicate process, weaving the thread of starlight mana along the surface of the barrier. Each movement was precise, careful, as if I were stitching two fabrics together. The thread wove in and out, following the hidden currents of the illusion, tracing the intricate design left behind by the Archmage. The barrier rippled, responding to my mana but not resisting, just as the novel described. Vitalyara's presence remained silent but alert, her curiosity evident as I worked. I could sense her observing every subtle movement I made, though for once she refrained from commenting, knowing this required my full focus. Slowly, the barrier began to shift. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden crash of magic or flash of light. Instead, it was a gentle unweaving, the layers of illusion falling away one by one. The air around the entrance grew stiller, the oppressive weight of the ancient magic dissipating as the threads of the barrier unraveled. Impressive, Vitaliera finally murmured, her voice barely a whisper in my mind. I can see why they called Arlen Morrowind a genius. More like obsessive, I muttered under my breath, but I couldn't help but agree. The sheer complexity of the barrier was astounding, and yet the solution had been so simple if you knew where to look. With one final tug of my mana thread, the barrier fell away completely, revealing the true entrance to Morrowind's vault. What had once been a simple cave now transformed into something far more imposing. The entrance yawned open, framed by ancient glyphs that shimmered faintly with dormant power as if daring anyone to step inside. Well, isn't it fitting of an archmage? Couldn't help but smirk, since, at this exact moment, things started forming right in front of my face. Chapter 152. The Vault, 2. Well, isn't it fitting of an archmage? I couldn't help but smirk as the glyphs shimmered, casting faint shadows on the stone walls. But even as I took in the sight, my thoughts drifted back to how I'd ended up here. Before leaving Rakenshore, I had been carefully planning my next move. The victory over the bandits had earned me some peace and goodwill from the Baron, but I knew my journey was far from over. While most would be satisfied with the praise and offers of comfort, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more I needed to accomplish. The sword tournament. That had been the key. I remembered it clearly. 2 weeks from now, a prestigious sword tournament was set to take place. A tournament filled with capable fighters, all vying for the prize. The details were all there, buried in the back of my mind from the novel Shattered Innocence. The top prize? An artifact of a really good utility, a treasure that would give the victor a significant edge. I wasn't aiming to merely attend. I planned to win. But there was a catch. I needed more power, more precision, if I was going to dominate without question. And I wasn't about to leave that to chance. That is why I knew if I wanted to be ready for the tournament, I had to increase my strength more. Not just in skill but in raw mana capacity. I started to weigh my options, sorting through everything I had learned, both from my training and from the novel. And as I stared at the map the Baron had provided me, a thought struck me. The forest. Wraithshade Forest. It was a place brimming with history and secrets. And within its depths lay the location of Morrowind's vault, the same dungeon left behind by the infamous archmage, Arlen Morrowind. Though this place is probably the easiest dungeon left behind by him, Arlen Morrowind wasn't the only one. Countless archmages, swordmasters, and other powerful figures had scattered their legacies across the world, leaving behind dungeons, trials, and treasure troves for the worthy or the foolish to find. It was almost a rite of passage for those seeking power. They left behind their most valuable artifacts, knowledge, and skills, hidden in places few could access. Some legacies were near impossible to find, buried deep in forgotten realms or guarded by beasts of unimaginable power. But Arlen, his approach had always been different. Rather than leaving one monumental legacy, he had scattered many smaller dungeons across the world. Each one housed a fragment of his knowledge or his power. Some were incredibly dangerous, places only those at the peak of their strength could hope to survive. But this one, here in Wraithshade Forest, was the weakest of the lot. Not that I will complain. Just as the thought crossed my mind, the atmosphere around me shifted. The faint hum of magic in the air grew louder, and the glyphs on the stone walls flared with a sudden brilliance. The peaceful stillness of the dungeon shattered as I felt it, the approach of something hostile. My instincts kicked in immediately. They're coming. I barely had time to react before shadows seemed to congeal out of the air around me. In an instant, they took form, monsters, creatures born from the very magic that permeated this place. The creatures that emerged from the shadows were unmistakable. Aracases. Their bodies were sleek and segmented, a disturbing mix of arachnid and insect, with hard, chitinous exoskeletons gleaming in the dim light of the dungeon. Their legs moved with an eerie precision, skittering across the ground with barely a sound. Their eyes glowed faintly, a venomous green, and I could see the lethal barbs protruding from their fangs, dripping with venom. Insectoid monsters like these were rare, and aracacees were even rarer still. Creatures known for their ability to blend into their surroundings, becoming nearly invisible until it was too late. Venomous, fast, and intelligent, they were a nightmare for any who dared face them unprepared. Great, I thought, eyeing the number of them. They had me surrounded. Hiss! Their hiss echoed through the dungeon, a high-pitched sound that vibrated the air, heightening the tension. My grip tightened on my estoc, the familiar hum of the flame of equinox stirring in response. These creatures weren't to be underestimated. Their venom was potent, enough to bring even seasoned warriors to their knees if they weren't careful. It can corrode my body even after I surround myself with mana. They were monsters of a high rank, so it was obvious that they would be strong. And I had no problem with that, as I already knew the monsters that would come in the first stage. Swoosh! Hiss! The first aracacee lunged at me, its fangs bared, aiming straight for my chest. I sidestepped, the movement fluid as my estoc sliced through the air, meeting its segmented body. Swoosh! Slash! The black flames flickered along the blade, severing the creature in one clean stroke. Its body twitched before crumpling to the ground, but I didn't have time to celebrate. The rest of them charged, moving as one, their venomous fangs gleaming in the low light. Their speed was frightening, but I kept my focus. My mind raced as I calculated their movements, searching for the openings in their attacks. Fast, but predictable, another aracacee lunged, and I met it head-on, my estoc finding the weak spot between its exoskeleton plates. My blade sliced through, and the black flames flared, disintegrating its venom before it could reach me. But the numbers were working against me. For every one I cut down, two more seemed to take its place, their movements relentless, their fangs snapping with deadly intent. The dungeon's atmosphere pulsed with magic, as if it were feeding these creatures. That was the thing with the dungeons. Even if they were created by humans and not naturally, they would all possess the same property. Monsters deriving their energy from the dungeon itself. I couldn't afford to waste any more time. Time to end this. My estoc hummed with energy as I focused, drawing the starlight from deep within my core. The black flames that had been dancing along the blade gave way to a shimmering light, a radiant glow that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I closed my eyes for just a moment, visualizing the starlight blooming and expanding, cutting through the darkness of the dungeon. Void Starfall Blade. Starlinda. The words left my lips in a whisper as the blade in my hand sheared with starlight. I swung the estoc with precision, and a crescent beam of light shot forth from the blade, cutting through the air like a comet. The beam pierced through the aracacees, their chitinous bodies splitting as the light tore through them. Half of them collapsed instantly, their bodies crumbling under the force of the attack. The other half, though wounded, continued to skitter forward, their fangs snapping, venom dripping from their mouths. But I wasn't worried. The strike had done its job, leaving the remaining monsters exposed and vulnerable. With calm precision, I drew from my core once again, feeling the starlight surge back into my body, replenishing the energy in my limbs. I lifted my estoc, feeling the familiar hum of power, and swung once more. Another crescent of starlight shot forward, the blade glowing with radiant energy as it arced through the air. This time, there was no hesitation. The light cut cleanly through the remaining aracacees, their bodies disintegrating as the beam tore them apart. The dungeon fell silent, save for the faint crackling of magic still pulsing through the stone walls. I lowered my estoc, the glow fading as the starlight receded. Not bad. For the starters, the Araxias were peak 3-star ranked monsters, which was why it was this easy for me to cut through them like this. You've improved, Vitaliera chimed in. Your control over your mana is much more refined now. I gave a small nod, acknowledging her observation. I haven't been slacking off, I replied. The truth was, while this dungeon would provide me with the edge I needed, my journey here had been anything but idle. I had made sure of that. As I traveled through the Wraithshade Forest to reach this place, I encountered a fair share of challenges. The forest was crawling with its own creatures, feral beasts, rogue elementals, and plenty of low-level monsters drawn to the natural mana of the region. And as I fought and cultivated, I could feel the progress. Each battle sharpened my skills. Each moment of meditation deepened my connection to the starlight mana. The monsters I had killed on the way weren't particularly difficult for someone at my level, but they had been plentiful, and that had given me the chance to improve my precision and stamina. I had focused on refining my control, letting the mana circulate more naturally through my body, and it had paid off. I could feel the energy coursing through me, stronger and more stable than ever before. Peak 3-star realm. It had been a long time coming, but I had finally reached it, and that was also why this place was much more important. Since it will be the place where I will be breaking through the 4th star. Chapter 153. The Vault 3. After cutting through the last of the Aracases, the dungeon fell eerily silent. The only sound that remained was the soft crackling of residual magic within the stone walls, like the fading echoes of a once powerful storm. I sheathed my estoc, the faint hum of starlight dissipating as the weapon rested once more at my side. With the monsters defeated, the path forward was now clear. I pressed on, stepping deeper into the heart of Morrowind's vault. My senses heightened as I prepared for whatever might come next. But as I ventured further, the tunnel began to widen, and the stone walls gradually gave way to an open expanse. It was a vast circular chamber. The ceiling arched high above, barely visible in the dim light that filtered through from an unknown source. Ancient glyphs were carved into the walls, glowing faintly with a soft blue hue, their magical presence still potent after all this time. The floor was smooth, almost unnaturally so, as if the stone had been polished by centuries of magical currents flowing through it. But what stood out the most was the lack of movement. No monsters, no traps, nothing. I stopped at the center of the chamber, my eyes scanning the room carefully. No creatures, no lurking dangers. Vitaliera mused, her voice thoughtful. But I can feel it. There's something here, something beneath the surface. And it was just as she had said. Just as it was described in the novel itself. I thought, my eyes narrowing as I recalled the precise details. This chamber was a place where the flow of mana from several different paths converged, an intersection where raw magical power pooled. In Shattered Innocence, it had been depicted as a place of immense potential, but also danger. So, what's the plan here? Vitaliara's voice carried a note of curiosity, but there was also an underlying tension. I feel stuck, as if this place is holding its breath. I couldn't help but smile at her words. The plan? I shook my head lightly. It's simple. Without hesitation, I stepped right into the center of the chamber, the smooth floor almost unervingly still beneath my feet. The moment my foot touched the very heart of the room, something shifted. A subtle click echoed through the air, like the release of a long-held lock. And then the chamber came alive. I could feel it, mana surging from all directions, as though it had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. My senses expanded, and in that instant, I could feel everything. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and all around me, hidden presences began to reveal themselves. Monsters. Dozens of them. No more than that. Hundreds. What? Vitaliara's surprise was palpable, her voice echoing in my mind. There's so many. She was right. The chamber wasn't empty after all. The monsters hadn't been visible because they hadn't been there in the physical sense. They had been hidden, their presence masked by the dungeon's magic, biding their time until the mechanism had been triggered. Or was she? It seemed she had also caught something up. This? Vitaliara's surprised voice came right into my head. She was surprised, rightfully, since even if she was a mythical beast, witnessing such a sight would not be something that she would frequently do. The grotesque monsters continued to emerge from the shadows, their twisted forms growing closer with each passing second. Their appearances were nightmarish, clawed limbs, fanged maws dripping with venom, and glowing eyes that promised a swift and painful death. But I didn't move. I stood there, my hand resting on the hilt of my estoc, but I made no attempt to draw it. "What are you doing?" Vital Yara's voice echoed in my mind, her confusion barely masked by her usual composure. She was right to question me, but I already knew what was happening. The first monster, a massive beast with tusks as long as my arm, charged forward, its maw opening wide, ready to sink its teeth into me. But just as it reached me, just as I should have felt the pressure of its jaws closing around me, it passed right through. There was no impact, no pain. It was as if the creature had never been there at all. "I see." Vital Yara's voice cut through the air again, slightly astonished this time. "That is why I did not sense any vitality from their bodies." "Illusions," I murmured, watching as more monsters approached. Each one looked just as menacing as the last, their movements precise, their attacks relentless. But none of them touched me. They simply passed through like smoke in the wind. One by one, the monsters continued to come, snarling and snapping, but none of them were real, not even close. They were nothing more than phantoms, projections of fear conjured by the dungeon's magic. "This dungeon's magic is stronger than I thought," Vitaliera admitted, her surprise still lingering in her voice. "I suspected as much," I replied, watching as another monstrous figure lunged at me, only to dissolve into nothing as it passed. This is part of the trial. Arlen Morrowind's dungeons were never about brute strength. It's all about perception. The monsters continued their assault, each more grotesque than the last, but I remained unfazed. I had read about this trial in Shattered Innocence. This part of the dungeon was designed to test not a person's ability to fight, but their ability to see through deception. The illusions were meant to invoke fear, to trick the mind into reacting, but that was the trap. If you believed in the monsters, if you let the illusions fool you, the dungeon would overwhelm you. But if you saw through them, if you realized they weren't real, you would pass the test unscathed. Well, I would not say unscathed if you have really polished your skills. Lucavian. I know. Seeing through illusions was only part of the trial. In a place like this, it wasn't just about figuring out what wasn't real, it was about discerning what was. And that line between truth and deception was always razor thin. Schlink. Without hesitation, I drew my estoc, the blade humming with the familiar pulse of my mana. The illusions swirled around me, their grotesque forms continuing their relentless assault, but I knew better than to believe all of them were fake. Somewhere within this chaos was something real, something dangerous. My eyes narrowed, my senses sharpening as I focused. There you are, just beyond the edge of my vision, hidden amidst the phantoms. I felt it, a presence that didn't fade like the others. Swoosh! In one swift motion, I slashed through the air, my estoc drawing a sharp arc in front of me. The blade met resistance, and then came the unmistakable sound of flesh being torn apart. Blood splattered across the stone floor, and the creature that had been hiding within the illusions let out a guttural scream before collapsing. The illusions wavered for a moment, the magic distorting as the real monster's body hit the ground. Its grotesque form twitched, the blood pooling around its segmented limbs. "What a wicked method," Vitaliera remarked, her voice carrying a mix of fascination and disgust as she observed the fallen creature. I shook my head, wiping the blood from my blade. "This is how an illusionist mage fights," I replied calmly. "They mask the truth in layers of deception, waiting for you to let your guard down. In a life and death battle, there's no such thing as wickedness, only survival." Vitaliera hummed in agreement, though her tone remained contemplative. Still, to mix reality with illusion so seamlessly, it's impressive in a dark way. You humans never cease to amaze me. "Heh, this is how we are." I shook my head with a smile. "Impressive but predictable," I said, glancing down at the creature's corpse. "Once you know the trick, it's only a matter of time before the real threats reveal themselves." I seem to hear some readers saying, "You knew from the book already." That would have been the case if I was not able to sense the life and death energy from the mana itself. While I am not that particularly smart, the Flame of Equinox is a technique that is derived from both life and death, as well as their balance. That is why, one way or another, I would understand that these monsters were not real, as they would not leave any death mana out when they disappeared. I sheathed my estoc once again, my gaze turning back to the chamber. This test wasn't over yet, as there would be many waves coming again and again. Until that monster is killed, this will continue happening. Heh, bring it on, I thought as I pushed my hand into the carcass of the monster. Spurt, grabbing the core inside, since this core is what I will need in the future. Chapter 154. The Vault. 4. I held the core in my hand, its faint glow pulsing with the energy I would need in the future. As I straightened up, I could feel the chamber shifting again, the dungeon's magic preparing to send more illusions, more real threats hidden among the false. The first wave had been manageable. The illusions were easy to see through once I understood the trick, and the real monsters had been sloppy, their presence betrayed by the subtle disturbance of death mana. But I knew better than to get comfortable. This dungeon wasn't about to let me off easy. And sure enough, the air shifted again. The temperature dropped, and I could feel the familiar hum of illusions weaving themselves into existence. The second wave was upon me. Swoosh! The first elusive creature lunged forward, its fanged mouth snapping at the air around me. I sidestepped effortlessly, my estoc flashing out in a clean arc. Nothing. The illusion dissolved the moment my blade passed through it, as expected. But just behind it, hidden in the shadows, was something real. A flash of light reflected off its sharpened claws. Swoosh! Slash! Blood splattered once more as the second real monster fell, its body crumpling to the ground in a twisted heap. The same pattern, only now the illusions were growing more aggressive, more intertwined with the real. Again, Vitaliera muttered. They're trying to overwhelm you. Mix the real with the false. What is the point of all this even? What is the point, you say? I muttered, pulling my estoc free from the fallen creature, its blood pooling at my feet. You'll see the reason soon enough. I knew this dungeon, like everything Arlen Morrowind had designed, was far from random. Every test, every monster, every illusion served a purpose. It wasn't about brute strength, not here. The first wave of Arrakis had been deliberate, a classic dungeon setup to give me a sense of what to expect, to lull me into the idea that this was just another typical challenge. Then the illusions had begun, weaving deception into the very fabric of the dungeon's trials. It wasn't merely about confusing me. It was meant to corrode my focus, wear down my resolve. So why these endless waves? Why the constant barrage of illusions mixed with the real? The reason will reveal itself soon. Is that so? Vitaliera said, and I could sense the curiousness in her voice. If that is what you say, then I will be waiting. That would be nice. Saying that, I focused around myself once again. More illusions swarmed around me, but I wasn't fazed. My senses were honed now, finely tuned to the subtle differences in mana. Life and death energy wove together, and the real monsters stood out like beacons amidst the smoke of illusion. The third wave came harder, faster. The illusions were getting trickier, blending seamlessly with their real counterparts. But each time I adapted. I'd let the false ones come close, just close enough to slip by, while my blade found its mark in the real ones. Each time, the feeling of cutting through real flesh was unmistakable. Swoosh! Slash! Spurt! The fifth real monster dropped, its core now in my hand, joining the others I'd collected. The chamber pulsed as if growing frustrated with my persistence. The waves kept coming, but I was unrelenting. By the time the sixth wave came, I could feel the dungeon itself growing desperate. The illusions were no longer mere phantoms. They were layered with complexity, trying to confuse me, to mask the real threats with more cunning. But the rhythm had already settled in. I could anticipate the dungeon's moves now. One illusion darted forward. I didn't even flinch. Another circled to my side, but I could feel the real monster approaching from behind. Swoosh! Slash! Another monster fell to the ground, its body crumpling as I yanked my blade free. The core joined the others in my hand, but I could feel the shift in the air once more. The dungeon wasn't finished. Not yet. Suddenly, I felt a presence, stronger, darker. A surge of mana rippled through the chamber, far more potent than anything I'd felt in the earlier waves. This wasn't just another illusion or a low-level creature hiding among them. No, this one was real, and its strength was closer to mine. Out of the swirling mass of illusions, the real threat emerged. Its massive form moved with unsettling grace for something so large. This was a peak 3-star monster, a creature called Mazikar, its body a twisted fusion of jagged stone and dark, pulsing flesh. Its eyes glowed with a deep, sinister light, and its massive claws dripped with venomous energy. I raised my estoc, but I knew immediately that this fight would be different. Mazikar was no simple monster. It was intelligent and fast. And most importantly, a monster that could pose a threat to my life. The illusions around me danced, shifting and twisting, making it harder to predict its movements. The mana in the chamber was thick with deception, each illusion a distraction, clouding my senses and masking the real threat's true intent. Swoosh! The beast lunged at me, its massive claws slashing through the air with terrifying speed. I dodged, barely, the wind from its strike brushing against my face. My eyes darted around, trying to see through the illusions, but they blurred and blended into each other, creating a web of confusion. I couldn't rely on my sight alone anymore. I countered, thrusting my estoc toward its chest, but Mazikar was ready. It deflected my strike with a swift, brutal motion, its claws clashing against my blade, sending a shockwave through my arm. The power behind its strike was immense. This was not a creature I could simply cut down with one clean blow. "This one's no joke," Vitaliera murmured, a note of warning in her voice. "I can tell," I muttered, shifting my stance as I prepared for the next attack. Swoosh! It came at me again, its claws tearing through the space between us. I dodged to the side, but just as I moved, an illusion of the monster appeared from the other direction, almost indistinguishable from the real one. For a split second I hesitated, just enough for Mazikar to close the gap. Its claws raked across my side, the venom sizzling as it met my mana barrier. Pain flared, but I didn't let it slow me down. I spun, using the momentum to strike back, my estoc glowing with the power of starlight. The blade sliced through the air, aiming for Mazikar's exposed flank, but once again, it anticipated the move. Clang! Our weapons clashed again, and I was forced to step back, breathing hard as the illusions danced around me, their movements mirroring Mazikar's real form so perfectly that every strike, every dodge, felt like I was fighting multiple enemies at once. My senses were failing me. The air was thick with deception, the mana distorting reality itself. Each step I took, each swing of my estoc was met with uncertainty. Swoosh! Slash! I dodged, but not fast enough. Mazikar's claws raked across my arm, slicing through the fabric and grazing my skin. Hiss! A sharp pain flared, and I could feel the venom sizzling as it met my mana barrier, slowly eroding it. I bit back the pain, pushing forward with a retaliatory strike, but the beast was already gone, slipping back into the web of illusions. "Damn it!" I muttered under my breath, frustration rising as I struggled to discern the real Mazikar among the countless false forms. My sight, my hearing, none of it was enough. They were failing me. "No, calm down. What are you doing?" In the novel, this fight would not progress like this, as the male lead of the magic tower would use annihilation magic to blast this whole place open. But I cannot do something like that, for now, which is why I need to think of something different. Clang! Our blades clashed once again, the force of Mazikar's strike sending a shockwave through my arm, rattling my bones. I stumbled back, my breathing heavy, sweat dripping down my forehead. The illusions tightened around me, making it impossible to see, to predict. Every time I thought I had the real one, it vanished, replaced by a phantom. The beast was playing with me, using the dungeon's magic to its full advantage. And in the chaos, I was taking hit after hit. Another slash across my leg, a near miss to my chest. The venom was slowly weakening my barrier, the pain starting to accumulate. I had to think. I couldn't rely on my senses anymore. Not my sight, not my hearing, not even my mana perception. All of it was being deceived by the dungeon, twisted and corrupted. But there was something else, something deeper, something I had learned over countless battles. The answer was laid right before my eyes. Instinct. That was the answer. Chapter 155. The Vault. 5. Instinct. All those times I had fought for my life, those moments when everything hung in the balance, when the edge between survival and death was razor thin, that had honed something beyond my senses. A battlefield instinct, something primal that had guided me in the most dangerous moments. It wasn't about seeing the enemy, or even feeling them through mana. It was about trusting in the battle itself. I took a deep breath, the pain in my body fading to the background. I closed my eyes. Trust your instincts. The world went dark. The sounds of Maziker's claws scraping the ground blending with the illusionary whispers. But in the stillness of the dark, I could feel it. A faint pulse, a rhythm in the chaos. It was subtle, barely there, but it was real. Maziker's presence. I waited, my estoc steady in my hand, as the illusions swirled around me, trying to confuse, to distract. I ignored them, letting the false images pass by as if they didn't exist. They were nothing but shadows. And then, I felt it. A slight shift in the air, the real Maziker moving toward me, hidden among the phantoms. There. The instant it lunged, I moved. My eyes remained closed, but my body knew where to go, my estoc swinging in a precise arc. The black flames of the flame of Equinox ignited, cutting through the air with lethal precision. Clang. This time I hit something solid. The real Maziker. I felt the force of the impact as my blade met its jagged stone-like hide. The beast let out a roar, its claws slashing toward me in retaliation, but I was already moving. My body flowed with the rhythm of the fight, each step guided not by sight, but by instinct. I ducked under its swipe, the venomous energy missing me by inches. My estoc glowed with the combined power of starlight and death energy as I twisted, driving the blade toward its exposed flank. This time I wasn't deceived. I wasn't fooled. The strike landed clean. Maziker screeched, the sound echoing through the chamber as my blade tore into its side, black flames searing its flesh. I pressed the attack, my eyes still closed, trusting in the instincts that had been carved into me through battle after battle. The illusions swirled around me, but they couldn't touch me. I was beyond them now. Maziker lunged again, but I was ready. My estoc moved with the fluidity of water, deflecting its claws, redirecting its force just as I had done with Corvin. Each strike I made cut deeper, each movement more precise, as I began to wear it down. This was the difference between reacting and knowing. And as I felt the beast stagger, its strength waning, I knew the end was near. Growling, Ra'ea, Ruahar. The sounds of the other monsters were coming from all across. I could even picture everything within my mind as their illusions could even affect my head just by voices. There were countless different monsters all around attacking me in the form of an illusion. Thud. Yet my ears picked the real sound. The sound of staggering back. Indeed, Maziker staggered back, its jagged stone hide cracked and bleeding where my estoc had struck. But I didn't move in for the killing blow. Not yet. This fight, this moment, it was more than just survival. It was an opportunity. A rare chance to train, to refine the instincts that had saved me countless times before. In the heat of battle, I had no choice but to trust them, and now was no different. Sometimes in battle, your eyes couldn't see everything. Sometimes your mind could be outwitted, overwhelmed by the chaos of the fight or by an opponent more cunning than you. In those moments, there was only one thing left to rely on: instinct. The primal knowledge that had been carved into your very bones through countless fights, where every move was life or death. I let Maziker lunge again, feeling the pulse of its movement through the air, the shift in mana as it twisted its massive body. My eyes remained closed, but my body moved, fluid and precise. I stepped back, narrowly avoiding its venomous claws, and instead of countering with a lethal blow, I deflected its strike, guiding its power away from me. Not yet, I thought. This wasn't just about defeating Maziker. It was about pushing my instincts to their limits, honing them until they were as sharp as the blade in my hand. I knew I could end this quickly. I had the power, the skills, even the black flames of the flame of equinox. But that wasn't the point. I needed to train. I needed to become better. So I held back. I limited my power, deliberately slowing my movements just enough to test my reactions, to feel every shift in the air, every pulse of danger. I didn't rely on my master's swordsmanship, the techniques that had been passed down to me. No, this was about something deeper. It was about me, about trusting the instincts that had carried me through so many battles. Mazikar screeched again, enraged by the fact that it couldn't land a solid hit. Its claws slashed wildly, venom dripping from the tips, but I danced around them, always just out of reach. My estoc moved in response, deflecting its strikes without delivering a killing blow. I let it think it was closing in, that it had a chance, even though I could feel its strength waning with each failed attack. This was the training I needed. In the chaos of a real fight, sometimes raw power wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to rely on something more primal, more instinctive. And that's what this fight had become. A test of my ability to survive not just with skill, but with something deeper. I let Mazikar press the attack, letting it come closer, feeling the brush of its claws against my skin, the venom sizzling against my mana barrier. I dodged and deflected, each movement smoother than the last, more precise. My instincts were sharpening with every second, my body reacting without thought, without hesitation. The rhythm of the fight became clear. I knew Mazikar's patterns now, its movements predictable even in the chaos of illusions swirling around us. It was a beast driven by desperation, by instinct, just like me. But unlike me, it didn't have control. As Mazikar lunged once more, I felt the moment arrive. My instincts screamed at me, guiding my hand as I deflected its final strike. This time, I didn't hold back. With a swift motion, I spun my estoc, black flames igniting along the blade, and drove it deep into the creature's side. Clank! Mazikar let out a final, agonized screech as the black flames of the flame of equinox consumed it from within. His body convulsed, then crumbled. Roar! Screech! Swoosh! The illusions continued to take presence over my head, filling it directly. Yet I did not care at all. Ha! I stood there, breathing heavily, my estoc still glowing with the faint remnants of the black flame. My eyes remained closed, my senses still sharp, still attuned to the fight. But now there was only silence. I had won. But more importantly, I had trained. Are you done? Vitalyara's voice came softly into my mind, breaking the silence that had settled over the chamber. I nodded, my breathing still a little heavy as I steadied myself. I was taking control of my breath, pulling myself back from the raw intensity of the fight. Yeah, I murmured, feeling the slight tremor in my body as the adrenaline began to fade. Good. I didn't want to disturb you, Vitalyara continued, her tone thoughtful. I felt like you were in the zone, so I decided to let you handle it without interference. That's why I didn't help. I gave a faint smile, still not opening my eyes. You did well. I was indeed in the zone. She had sensed it. That primal focus, that clarity of mind where everything else fades away, and all that matters is the fight. It had been a long time since I'd felt that kind of connection with my instincts, and it had been necessary for a fight like this. With a deep breath, I opened my eyes. The illusions were still there, countless monsters filling the chamber, their grotesque forms twisting and snarling, surrounding me like a sea of phantoms. But now they seemed distant, insignificant. I could feel their presence, but there was no longer any real threat. The final, true monster had been dealt with, and the illusions were nothing more than an echo of the dungeon's magic. I stood there calmly, my estoc still glowing faintly with the remnants of the black flames from the flame of equinox. The real challenge had passed, and now I could move forward. I had what I needed, the cores from the real monsters. What are you going to do now? Vitalyara asked, looking at me with her curious eyes. Indeed, it was understandable that she was curious. After all, now that I have dealt with the real monsters, we need to advance to the next stage. Didn't you say you wanted to witness a good show? It is about to come now. It was time to put on a good show. Chapter 156. The Vault. 6. I crouched down, gathering the cores of the fallen monsters one by one, their faint glow pulsing with energy as I placed them carefully in my pouch. As I worked, I could feel Vitalyara's curious gaze on me. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, her voice light, but her eyes sharp, watching my every move. "Didn't you say you wanted to witness a good show?" I replied with a smirk. "It's about to come now." As I continued picking up the cores, I glanced at her. "You must have seen quite a few strong people while traveling with my master, haven't you?" Vitalyara tilted her head, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully before she nodded. "Indeed, I've met many strong people. Mages, warriors, even those who dabbled in darker arts." I chuckled softly. "Have you ever thought about what they all have in common?" Vitalyara paused, considering my question. "Common?" Well, she mused. "Talent, of course. Hard work, training, and maybe an unshakable determination." Her voice was thoughtful, though not entirely convinced by her own answer. I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips as I reached for another core. "No, that's not it." "Oh!" Her curiosity was piqued. "Then what?" "It's not just talent or hard work," I said, standing up and brushing the dust off my hands. "The one thing that most strong people have in common is that nearly all of them have some sort of weird quirk." Vitalyara blinked in surprise. "A quirk?" She tilted her head, a bit of amusement creeping into her voice. "Explain." I laughed softly as I tossed a core into my pouch. "Think about it. My master said he met a mage with a strange obsession with perfecting one single spell for decades, even though everyone told him it wasn't necessary. He also said that he met a swordsman once who refused to use anything but the oldest, most rusted blades he could find. He said they had more character, and well, he himself was also quite a bit." Vitalyara's eyes widened in realization, the pieces clicking together. "Ah, I see now. They're all a little eccentric." "Exactly," I said, nodding. "On the path of strength, it is quite hard to stay sane, after all. That is—" Vitalyara trailed off, clearly thinking deeply about what I'd said. I let the silence linger for a moment before speaking again, my tone casual. "So, what do you think Arlen Morrowind's quirk is?" Vitalyara blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. "His quirk?" she repeated, her voice laced with confusion. "Don't know. What could it be? He was an archmage, one of the strongest mages of his time. Surely his focus was on something grand, something important, right?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "Come on, you must have noticed it already." She tilted her head, clearly searching for an answer but coming up short. "Noticed what?" "I can't say I've seen anything that stands out. The small details," I said, a knowing smile creeping onto my lips. "It's all in the details. Puzzles would be the right word for it." "Puzzles?" Vitalyara sounded even more confused now, though there was a hint of realization creeping into her voice. "Wait, you mean all of this, the traps, the illusions, even the way the dungeon is structured, it's like a giant puzzle?" I nodded, tossing another core into my pouch. "Exactly. Arlen Morrowind wasn't just obsessed with raw power or grand displays of magic. His quirk was puzzles, small, intricate details hidden in plain sight. His dungeons are all about testing not just your strength but your mind. He wanted to see if those who entered his domain could think their way out of a trap, not just fight their way out." Vitalyara's eyes widened in understanding, her voice carrying a newfound respect. "So, everything here has been a test, a puzzle for us to solve." "Precisely," I said, "and we've been solving it piece by piece. That's his quirk. It's not about brute strength or overwhelming power. It's about outsmarting the game he's laid out in front of us." I looked toward the path ahead, feeling the weight of the cores in my pouch. Now all that is left is the need to figure out the final piece of this puzzle. Vitalyara looked around, her gaze scanning the chamber as the illusions continued to swirl around us. Her expression was a mix of confusion and curiosity. "What's the puzzle now, then? I don't see anything out of place." I smirked, already knowing the answer. Details, I said simply, my voice calm as I knelt down, retrieving the core of the first monster I had killed. It's always the details. Things we tend to overlook. Details? She repeated, still not quite grasping the concept. I smiled as I carefully slipped the core into my spatial ring alongside the others. Think about it. Why did I keep all these cores in order? Why not just store them randomly? Vitalyara's eyes flickered with understanding but still lacked complete clarity. Wait, you kept them in order? Why? This, I said, standing up and brushing the dust from my knees. I moved toward the area where I had first entered the dungeon, the illusions still dancing around us, but they were nothing more than distractions now. My focus was on the ground beneath my feet, the small details that most would have ignored in the chaos of the fight. Finally, I reached the spot, right where I had first stepped into this chamber. And there, almost imperceptible, was a small cavity carved into the stone floor. It was perfectly shaped, as if waiting for something specific to be placed inside. I knelt down and held the core above the cavity. This is why, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, before gently placing the core into the small space. It fit perfectly without any wasted room. As soon as the core clicked into place, a faint hum resonated through the chamber, the illusions around us flickering for a moment. The faint hum from the chamber reverberated through the air, and for a split second, I saw it. Parts of the illusion flickered, edges becoming hazy before they slowly began to dissolve. Vitalyara mumbled under her breath, her eyes narrowing as she observed the changes. The cores, they need to be put in order. I smiled at her quick deduction. You're catching on fast, I said with a nod. Without hesitation, I reached for the second core stored in my spatial ring. This puzzle, this sequence, it wasn't a mystery to me. I knew it well thanks to the novel. The male lead of the Magic Tower had stumbled upon it after countless attempts, trial, and error that nearly drove him mad. But I had the advantage. I didn't need to fumble through different combinations or test the wrong answers. I knew the order. Holding the second core, I moved toward the next spot in line. The illusions around me still danced, but I could sense their presence weakening. They were no longer the threat they once seemed, just shadows clinging to the magic of the dungeon. This part was frustrating for the protagonist. I muttered, more to myself than to Vitalyara. He spent weeks figuring out the right sequence. Protagonist, Vitalyara repeated, astonished. Don't mind me. Sometimes such slip-ups can be made, but it is always better to be careful in the future when such things occur. Talk. I placed the second core into another small cavity on the floor, identical to the first. As soon as it clicked into place, the hum returned, stronger this time. Another section of the illusion faded, unraveling like a loose thread. With quiet confidence, I stood and moved toward the next spot, already reaching for the third core. The path was clear in my mind, thanks to the knowledge from the novel. I didn't need to guess. I just needed to follow the steps that had already been laid out. We're almost there, I said, more to myself as I prepared to place the next core. One by one, I placed the cores into their destined locations, each fitting perfectly into its small cavity. The hum of the dungeon's magic grew louder with each core, and the illusions continued to flicker and fade. The path was clear in my mind, the sequence from the novel guiding me step by step. To the right, I muttered, reaching for the third core and moving toward the next spot. I could almost hear the protagonist's frustration in my mind as I remembered how many times he had tried and failed. But I didn't have to go through the same torment. I knew exactly what to do. Talk. The third core clicked into place, and another section of the illusion unraveled, like threads coming loose from an old tapestry. To the one on the right center, I whispered to myself as I moved to the fourth core, slipping it into the next cavity without hesitation. The hum grew stronger, almost resonating through the floor beneath my feet. The dungeon was responding, slowly revealing its true form. The fifth, sixth, and seventh cores followed in quick succession, each one placed without any space wasted. With the last core in hand, I made my way to the final cavity, the one that would complete the sequence and fully dispel the illusions. The magic in the chamber seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for this moment. "Here we go," I muttered, placing the final core into its slot. As soon as it clicked into place, the hum transformed into a deep, resonant vibration, and in an instant, the remaining illusions shattered. The false monsters, the distortions in the air, all of it vanished, leaving the chamber bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. The puzzle was complete. Chapter 157. The Vault 7. The soft glow that bathed the chamber made everything feel serene. But before everything went down, there was one final thing that one needed to do. "Vitalera," I called, keeping my voice light. She turned to me, curiosity evident in her feline gaze. "Climb up there," I said, pointing toward the chamber's walls, which stretched high above us. "Why?" she asked, her eyes narrowing in confusion. I simply smiled. "Just do it. Trust me." She gave me a skeptical look but complied without further question. Her sleek form moved effortlessly as she scaled the walls with quick, agile paws, her movements feline and graceful. Within moments, she had ascended to a vantage point near the ceiling, her gaze sweeping over the chamber from above. From her elevated position, I waited for her reaction, knowing what she was about to see would put the final piece of the puzzle into place. The moment Vitaliera reached her vantage point high above the chamber, I watched her eyes widen slightly, her expression shifting into one of surprise. She looked down to the ground, her feline grace momentarily overshadowed by confusion. "Huh!" she mumbled, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch. I couldn't help but smile. "What do you see?" I asked, already knowing what had caught her attention. She hesitated for a moment before responding, her tone laced with disbelief. "It says, 'Welcome, player.'" I chuckled softly. Exactly. From her elevated position, she could now see the full layout of the chamber below. Each core I had placed, every section of the illusion that had disappeared, all forming the perfect pattern that spelled out those words. It was the final flourish of Arlen Morrowind's puzzle. I called down to Vitaliera, still smiling as she remained perched high above. "Come back down." Without hesitation, she leaped from the wall, her sleek form landing gracefully on my shoulder, her paws barely making a sound. Her eyes were still wide, trying to piece together what she had just witnessed from above. I could sense her curiosity bubbling just beneath the surface. "Get ready for the show," I said with a grin, my voice low. She looked at me, her feline eyes narrowing. "The show? What are you planning?" I ignored the question and faced forward, the words already forming on my tongue. "I am welcomed." The moment the words left my lips, the entire space reacted. Rumble. The ground beneath us shuddered violently, as if some ancient force had been awakened. The air filled with a deep, resonating hum, and the walls began to move, sliding and shifting like pieces of a massive puzzle being realigned. Crack! Tremors surged through the chamber, shaking the very foundation we stood on. It was as if the entire dungeon had come alive, responding to the activation of the final puzzle. "What's happening?" Vitaliara's voice carried a rare note of alarm as she dug her claws into my shoulder for balance. The walls groaned and rumbled, massive stone slabs sliding into place as though the entire room was being reshaped. Vitaliara's claws dug into my shoulder, her balance threatened by the violent tremors. "What's happening?" she asked, her usual composure shaken. I just smiled, letting the chaos around us unfold. "In this world, not everything is just about magic," I replied, my voice calm despite the quaking ground beneath us. "There are many things that can be achieved without the involvement of mana." She looked at me, still bewildered, her feline instincts sensing the shift but not fully understanding. "What do you mean?" "This place is a prime example of one of those things," I continued, gesturing toward the walls that continued to shift and slide as if part of some ancient, intricate mechanism. The tremors grew louder, the grinding of stone against stone reverberating through the chamber. And then, with a final groan, the walls parted, revealing a hidden path behind them. The dust and debris settled as the convulsions stopped, leaving the newly opened passage gleaming with an eerie, faint light. There, I said, nodding toward the opening. That's the true way forward. The hidden passage gleamed with a soft, eerie light, revealing a smooth, spiraling staircase that descended deeper into the dungeon. The walls around it were lined with faintly glowing symbols, casting a dim but steady illumination that guided the way forward. Well, that's one way to welcome someone, I muttered to myself, glancing at Vitaliera perched on my shoulder. Her feline eyes darted around, still processing the transformation of the chamber, though she didn't say a word. The path was clear, and there was no point in delaying any further. I took the first step onto the staircase, feeling the smooth, cold surface beneath my boots as I began my descent. Each step echoed softly in the chamber, the weight of the dungeon's secrets pressing down on me as we descended deeper into the unknown. It's time, I said quietly, more to myself than to Vitaliera. Time to collect what I came for. The promise of the reward lay just ahead, waiting for me at the bottom of this spiral. As I continued walking down the spiral staircase, Vitaliera's ears twitched, and she suddenly spoke up, her voice tinged with both curiosity and wariness. I can feel it again. The strong energy we sensed when we first entered the dungeon. It's stronger now. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the glowing path ahead. That's because we're nearing the source, I replied calmly. The energy we felt at the start was just a faint echo. Here it's contained. The air grew heavier with every step, the weight of the mana pressing down on us, thick and tangible. We reached the bottom of the staircase, and before us, a vast chamber opened up, revealing a sight that even I hadn't fully expected. The space was massive, far larger than any of the previous rooms in the dungeon. The walls were lined with ancient runes, and at the center of the room was a raised platform, glowing with an intense, pulsating energy. The sheer force radiating from the platform made the air hum. Vitaliera leaped down from my shoulder, landing gracefully on the ground. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight, her usually composed expression giving way to astonishment. "This?" she murmured, barely able to form the words as she gazed at the spectacle before us. I smiled, my own eyes fixed on the platform ahead. "We've reached the heart of Morrowind's vault." Vitaliera's astonishment didn't wane as she continued to gaze at the energy radiating from the platform. Her eyes flickered with recognition, her voice filled with awe. This is a minor fundamental vein." I, of course, knew what a minor fundamental vein was. After all, this place was also explained in the novel directly from the male lead's eyes. Though I still let her continue talking and still staring at the pulsating energy, Vitaliera continued. "It's an extremely rare type of mana vein. You'd be hard-pressed to find another like it in the world. The moment such veins are discovered, they're immediately claimed by humans or any other awakened, drained for their power." She looked really impressed. The mana concentration in a place like this is far denser than normal areas. It allows anyone cultivating near it to accumulate energy much faster, she explained, her voice filled with a sense of wonder. "It's not just the amount of mana either, the quality is higher, purer. Training or recovering here makes everything far more efficient. That's why these veins are so sought after. They don't last long once found. I mean, it was no wonder that the energy felt so potent. The vein itself was amplifying everything around it, creating an atmosphere perfect for cultivation. But the most impressive thing here is the fact that someone was able to seal this place off for future newcomers. Well, for an archmage, this vein means nothing after all. So why not reserve it for the future generations? Your humans are always interesting." I smiled at Vitaliera's comment, watching as the energy from the minor fundamental vein swirled around us. "Humans can be complicated, but I suppose that's part of the fun, isn't it?" I said lightly, stepping closer to the glowing platform. The vein's power was undeniable, but knowing it had been reserved for those who could solve the puzzle made it even more intriguing. Arlen Morrowind had created a test not just for strength but for insight, a reward for those who could understand the subtleties of his design. Still, to think something like this was left behind, I mused aloud. The power alone could bring a lot of people to ruin if it fell into the wrong hands. Perhaps that's why it was hidden so well. Vitaliera said, her eyes still glowing with amazement. Only those who could see beyond the obvious would find it. Exactly, I replied. A perfect reward for the right mind. I let my gaze linger on the platform for a moment longer, feeling the anticipation build, since it was the time to finally reach the 4-star realm. Chapter 158. Breakthrough. Lucavian stood before the pulsating platform, his eyes narrowing as he took in the massive chamber. The energy from the minor fundamental vein thrummed through the air, thick and tangible, amplifying the mana within the room. He could feel the power radiating from the core of the chamber, like a vast ocean waiting to be tapped into. His heart pounded in his chest, not from anxiety, but from the anticipation of what was to come. It's time, he whispered to himself, his breath steady despite the immensity of the moment. He stepped closer to the platform, the glow of the energy casting a pale light on his features. Vitaliera perched by his side, her feline eyes never leaving him. Though her awe had faded into quiet composure, Lucavian could still sense her heightened awareness of the situation. This was a critical moment, one that would determine his future path. Lucavian closed his eyes, centering his focus on his cultivation core. The Devourer of Stars technique thrummed deep within him, the swirling starlight mana coiling inside his body like a waiting storm. He had cultivated relentlessly to reach this point, his core already nearing its limit. Now, with the power of the vein amplifying everything around him, he would take the final leap. He dropped to a seated position on the platform, legs crossed, his hands resting lightly on his knees. The hum of mana from the vein grew louder, as if it could sense the impending breakthrough. Lucavian allowed his breathing to slow, his senses sharpening as he began to draw in the mana from the vein. It surged toward him, a river of pure energy flooding his body. Vitaliera watched from her place, her eyes glinting with both caution and trust. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice soft in his mind. Lucavian didn't respond immediately, his focus solely on the swirling energy coalescing around him. His entire body felt like a vessel filling with stars, the power building to a critical mass. He could feel every strand of mana within him, each pulse of starlight as it gathered and condensed at his core. The Devourer of Stars technique was designed for this, taking in the energy around him and refining it, merging it with his own essence to elevate his power. "I'm ready," he finally murmured, his voice a calm contrast to the storm of power building within him. With that, Lucavian initiated the final phase of his breakthrough. The starlight mana coiled within him began to move, spiraling through his body, merging with the energy from the minor fundamental vein. It felt as though his very soul was being stretched and expanded, the boundaries of his current cultivation core shattering as the new power flooded in. His breathing deepened, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the mana as it surged through him. Sweat beaded on his brow, but he remained focused, his will unshakable. As the energy coursed through Lucavian's body, his mind turned inward, focusing on the stars he had formed in the previous stages of his cultivation. 3 brilliant stars, each one a testament to his journey thus far, glowed within his cultivation core, their light steady and constant. They were the foundation of his power, but now, to ascend to the next level, he had to take the Devourer of Stars technique to a more complex stage. His breathing slowed as he visualized the next step, the crux of the breakthrough, entangling the stars. Each star held immense power on its own, but they were isolated and unconnected. The next phase of the Devourer of Stars technique required him to draw these individual stars into a perfect orbit, binding them together so that their energy flowed in harmony. Lucavian's brow furrowed, feeling the immense challenge of the task. The stars needed to be connected, not by force, but by aligning their energies so precisely that they naturally drew toward one another. He couldn't rush this process, or he risked destabilizing the stars he had already formed. He visualized the first star, its energy pulsing rhythmically in tune with his breathing. Slowly, he extended his mana, carefully weaving it around the star's surface. The star responded, its light growing brighter as it absorbed the mana he fed it. Then, he turned his attention to the second star. His mana reached out, a delicate thread of energy, and began wrapping around the second star in the same way. The challenge lay in balancing the energy between them, ensuring that the two stars did not repel each other, but instead fell into a harmonious orbit. His body trembled slightly as he carefully manipulated the mana, feeling the subtle resistance between the two forces. A soft hum echoed within him, the two stars beginning to move, drawn into a slow, deliberate orbit around each other. Their light flickered as they synchronized, the first step of entangling complete. Lucavian let out a slow breath, knowing this was just the beginning. "Two stars," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper, eyes still closed as he focused on the task. The third star awaited its connection. It gleamed brightly, but Lucavian could feel the tension. Drawing the third star into the orbit would require even more precision, as the three stars needed to balance perfectly. The smallest misstep could disrupt the entire process, causing the stars to collide and the breakthrough to fail. He extended his mana again, this time more cautiously. His energy flowed from the first and second stars, reaching out toward the third. The three energies pulsed together, vibrating with increasing intensity as the distance between them shrank. Lucavian's heart pounded as he concentrated, holding all three in perfect equilibrium. The third star hesitated for a moment, resisting the pull of the others. Lucavian gritted his teeth, pushing more of his will into the technique, coaxing the star forward without forcing it. Gradually, the resistance weakened, and the third star began to move, slowly aligning with the other two. Then, with a soft, almost inaudible click, the three stars snapped into place, forming a perfect orbital system within his core. Lucavian's entire body jolted as the energies merged, his chest tightening as if a powerful gravitational force had taken hold of him. The stars spun around one another, their light intensifying as their energy flowed seamlessly between them. Hoo-hoo! He took a deep breath, the weight of his breakthrough still heavy on his shoulders. But he knew this wasn't the end. He had chosen this place not merely for the purpose of reaching the four-star realm, but for something far more crucial: stabilization and expansion. His core, unlike most, demanded an extraordinary amount of mana to support its complex structure, and the minor fundamental vein was the key to making that happen. The three stars spun within his core, now in perfect harmony, but Lucavian could feel the underlying instability. His unique condition meant that his core was far more volatile than others. If he didn't stabilize it now, the breakthrough would be incomplete, leaving him vulnerable in the future. And then there was the next step, expanding the boundaries of his core, increasing his mana capacity to handle the immense power he sought to wield. He closed his eyes again, steadying his breath, and focused inward. The stars were spinning in orbit, their light swirling in his core, but now he had to push them further. The rotational force of the stars wasn't just a byproduct of the entanglement, it was the very tool he would use to expand his core. Slowly, Lucavian began drawing mana from the air around him, feeling the dense energy of the minor fundamental vein pulse through his body. The power flooded into him, almost overwhelming, but he kept his focus razor-sharp. He let the mana flow into his core, saturating the stars as they continued their orbit. As the mana poured in, Lucavian adjusted the speed of the stars' rotation, quickening their pace. The energy they generated from their movement grew stronger, creating a centrifugal force that pressed against the boundaries of his core. The torque produced by their spinning wasn't just raw power, it was the key to pushing the limits of his mana capacity. His core resisted at first, straining under the pressure of the growing energy, but Lucavian didn't relent. He knew this was the critical moment, the point where his core would either expand or shatter. His heart pounded in his chest as he poured more mana into the spinning stars, feeling the torque increase with every second. "Steady," he whispered, his voice barely audible as he pushed harder. The pressure inside him built rapidly, the stars spinning faster, the mana churning and swirling with them. Lucavian gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his brow as the strain became nearly unbearable. His body trembled under the immense force, but he couldn't stop now. He had to push the boundaries of his core, had to make it larger, stronger. With a sharp exhale, Lucavian directed the torque outward, pressing it against the edges of his core. The stars spun like gears in a vast engine, their rotational energy amplifying the pressure on the core's borders. He felt the first crack in the barrier, a small fissure that sent a jolt through his entire being. It wasn't enough yet, he needed more. He drew in more mana from the vein, faster now, flooding his body with the raw, unfiltered energy of the dungeon. The minor fundamental vein thrummed in response, its power flowing into Lucavian like a river, feeding the growing storm inside him. His core strained, the borders trembling under the increasing pressure. Almost there, he muttered, his voice strained but determined. The stars spun faster, the torque growing to a level Lucavian had never felt before. His core's borders shuddered, resisting the expansion, but he could feel them weakening, the cracks spreading. He pushed harder, his will unyielding as he poured everything he had into the process. Crack. Then, with a deep, resonating crack, the borders of his core shattered. The pressure that had been building inside him exploded outward, and for a brief moment, Lucavian felt like he was suspended in space, weightless, as his core expanded. The stars within him flared with brilliant light, filling the new, larger space with their energy. It is over. The hard part was now complete. Chapter 159. Breakthrough 2. Almost there, Lucavian muttered. After dealing with the mana for a long time, he had finally finished cracking his core and expanding the mana that was stored inside there. Crack. With the sound of the crack, the hard part reached its end. It is over. He felt the immediate shift, the moment when everything clicked into place. His core had expanded, and the stars within him pulsed with renewed brilliance, filling the space with their energy. He remained still for a moment, suspended in that brief weightlessness, letting the feeling sink in. It's done. The breakthrough, finally, the pressure that had once been overwhelming was gone, replaced by a steady, powerful hum deep within his body. But it wasn't over yet. He still needed to stabilize the influx of energy to anchor his core in this new realm of power. Without stabilization, all of this would be for nothing. Slowly, he began the process of regulating the mana flow, pulling in the last remnants of energy from the minor fundamental vein. The raw, potent power that had fueled his breakthrough now had to be tempered and integrated into his core. His breathing slowed, each inhale pulling more mana into his body, each exhale releasing the tension from his muscles. Steady. There's no need to rush this. Lucavian's mind sharpened as he focused on his internal circulation, ensuring that the flow of energy remained smooth and uninterrupted. He could feel the stars within him spinning at a steady pace, their light no longer volatile but controlled, harnessed to his will. His core, though expanded, needed to adjust to the new level of power, and the mana he was absorbing would serve to strengthen and fortify the borders he had just shattered. The final pieces are falling into place. His entire being hummed with the resonance of the stars, their energy coiling and flowing through his veins like liquid fire. Each pulse of mana felt like a heartbeat, steady and rhythmic, aligning with the newfound strength in his core. Lucavian could feel his circulation improving, the pathways inside his body widening and becoming more efficient as the mana flowed freely through them. The expansion wasn't just about capacity. It's about control. The realization struck him with clarity. This breakthrough had not only increased his mana reserves, but had also enhanced his control over that mana. The stars he had entangled were now perfectly aligned, their combined energy amplifying his strength while allowing for precise manipulation. He could feel the subtle difference in how he could now command the mana, directing it with a thought, shaping it as easily as breathing. Lucavian sat cross-legged, grounding himself, as the remaining energy from the vein continued to pour into him. The glow around him began to fade, signaling that the minor fundamental vein's power was nearly spent. But that was fine. He had taken everything he needed from this place. Now, it was just a matter of absorbing the final bits and stabilizing his core fully. His breathing deepened, and he focused inward once again. The three stars spun in their orbital system, perfectly balanced, their energy flowing like a steady river through his body. He directed the remaining mana toward them, feeding them slowly, allowing the stars to absorb and refine the last vestiges of energy. This is it. The final step. His core pulsed once, twice, and then settled. The stars glowed softly, their light no longer flaring but a steady, constant presence. The flow of mana through his body felt natural now, as if this level of power had always been his. The expansion had been successful, and the stabilization was complete. He opened his eyes slowly, his vision adjusting to the dim light of the chamber. His body felt different, stronger, lighter, more attuned to the world around him. The overwhelming tension from the breakthrough had melted away, leaving behind only clarity and strength. It's done. Truly done. He stood up, feeling the weight of his new power settle within him. The stars within his core continued their steady orbit, and he could sense the boundless energy now at his disposal. The process had been grueling, but the result was worth every moment of struggle. Vitaliera, who had been silently watching the entire process, leaped from her perch and landed gracefully beside him. Her eyes gleamed with approval as she looked up at him. "You've stabilized everything, haven't you?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with pride. Indeed, she was feeling prideful. Her sharp eyes lingered on Lucavian, observing the subtle changes in him with a quiet intensity. While he had focused solely on breaking through and stabilizing his core, she had noticed something else, something unusual. The mana that had poured into his body hadn't just been absorbed into his core. It had also woven itself into his physical form, integrating with his very being. "Gerald, you truly found someone peculiar," she mused silently, her thoughts drifting to the mysterious nature of this young man before her. The protective layer of starlight mana that had enveloped him during his breakthrough was unlike anything she had seen before. It wasn't just an aura of mana meant to shield him from external forces. It had acted as a buffer, insulating his body from the immense strain his core had undergone. The starlight mana had coiled around him in a way that suggested more than just a reaction to his cultivation. It had protected him as if it was instinctively tied to him, a phenomenon that raised more questions than answers. Vitaliara's tail flicked thoughtfully as she considered the implications. Normally, mana integration was a slow, controlled process, one that required focus and discipline to manage. Yet, Lucavian had experienced it naturally, without even realizing it. The starlight mana that had fused with his core had also bound itself to his body, enhancing his physical form while providing a level of protection that was rare, if not unheard of. "This isn't something I've seen before," she thought, her feline gaze narrowing slightly as she continued to observe Lucavian's calm demeanor. His breakthrough had been successful, but there was more at play here, more than he realized. The way the starlight mana had enveloped him, almost cradling him in its glow, wasn't something she could explain easily. It felt like the mana had responded to him personally, not just as fuel for his cultivation but as a safeguard. It hadn't dissipated after the breakthrough either. There was a residual glow, faint but persistent, that lingered around him even now. The mana, it's become part of him, not just his core, her thoughts turning serious. But why? And how? She wouldn't tell him. Not yet, anyway. Lucavian had enough on his plate after the breakthrough, and this new discovery would only distract him. Also, this physique of his. She felt like there were many things that needed to be discovered about that, which made it quite hard to reveal things for the time being. This wasn't something to take lightly, and she couldn't jump to conclusions without fully understanding the scope of the phenomenon. "Until I know more, I'll keep it to myself," she decided, her feline instincts guiding her. She would investigate quietly, keeping an eye on Lucavian as his cultivation progressed. Whatever was happening to him, it was tied to the stars themselves, and perhaps it would reveal more in time. For now, though, she would remain silent, watching and waiting. Lucavian, oblivious to her inner thoughts, glanced down at her. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice calm, as if sensing her scrutiny. Vitaliera blinked once, her expression unreadable as she leaped onto his shoulder, her usual place. "Just thinking how peculiar you are," she replied smoothly, her tone light. Lucavian chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You've said that before. What is wrong with saying it again?" "Heh! Nothing is wrong with that," Vitaliera shifted slightly, her feline gaze softening for a brief moment as she observed Lucavian. Then, with a subtle movement, she leaped down from his shoulder, landing gracefully on the ground. Without hesitation, she padded closer to him, her sleek form moving with the quiet grace of a predator at ease. "Nothing wrong at all," she said, her voice smooth and teasing. Lucavian raised an eyebrow, watching her approach with mild curiosity. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, she did something unexpected. Vitaliera nudged her head against his leg, rubbing her head into him like a cat, showing affection. Her soft fur brushed against his body, and she purred slightly, the sound almost imperceptible but unmistakable in its warmth. Lucavian blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the gesture. He stood still, unsure of what to make of it at first. "Pfft. Sometimes, I forget that you are also a cat. Humph. If not for things like this, you will never remember." Her actions seemed almost playful, a rare display of affection from the ever-watchful Vitaliera. "Ha ha ha." She circled him once before nudging her head into his side again, this time more insistent, as if reminding him that despite her sharp wit and piercing gaze, she was still very much a cat. "You've been through a lot," she murmured, her voice low and softer than usual. "A bit of comfort never hurts." Lucavian's smile widened slightly, his hand instinctively reaching down to run through the fur on her head, feeling the softness beneath his fingers. "I suppose not. What are you going to do now?" Vitaliera asked, and Lucavian smiled. "Well, I broke through the 4-star. But we can't have the second core falling behind, can we?" Chapter 160. The Twin Fishes. After the talk, Lucavian sat down once more, crossing his legs and closing his eyes as he slipped into a meditative state. His breathing slowed, the steady rhythm helping him align with the flow of energy within his body. The residual mana from the minor fundamental vein still hummed faintly in the air, and he used it to complete the final steps of stabilizing his breakthrough. For a few moments all was quiet. The stars within his core spun in perfect harmony, and he felt the power radiating through him, steady and controlled. As he delved deeper into his own body's energy pathways, he began to notice the full extent of the changes that had taken place during his breakthrough. The core, it's grown by at least 50%, he realized, marveling at the vast increase in his mana capacity. Where his core once held a finite amount of energy, it now felt like a boundless reservoir. The difference was staggering. It wasn't just the size, it was the quality. The mana flowing through him now felt richer, more potent, as if every pulse contained far more energy than before. Even at this stage, I should be able to counter the mana of a peak 4-star. How much stronger will it be as it grows up? His meridians, too, had changed. As Lucavian focused on them, he could sense that they had strengthened significantly. The once fragile pathways through which his mana flowed now felt robust, fortified by the immense energy of the minor fundamental vein. But there was something more. The positions. They've shifted, he thought, his brow furrowing slightly in concentration. It wasn't a random change. His meridians had subtly rearranged themselves, adapting to something within him. It was almost as though his body had realigned itself to better suit his unique condition, the reversed meridians that had always set him apart from others. "This feels right," Lucavian mused. For the first time in a long while, he felt that his body had found some form of balance. His meridians, now stronger and better positioned, allowed mana to flow more efficiently than ever. The change felt natural, as if his body had always been preparing for this moment of adaptation. With the strengthening of his meridians, his mana circulation improved, the energy coursing through his body faster and with greater precision. The stars within his core, spinning in their orbital system, seemed to respond in kind, their light glowing brighter as his meridians supported their flow of energy more seamlessly. This is a welcome change, he thought, a small smile playing on his lips. His special physique, once a source of struggle and limitation, now seemed to be evolving in a way that would only enhance his cultivation. The increased mana capacity, the strengthened meridians, the newfound balance within his core, all of it would propel him forward on his path to greater power. Vitaliera, who had been quietly watching from her spot, tilted her head as she sensed the shift in his energy. "You seem different," she remarked, her tone curious but laced with understanding. "More than just stronger." Lucavian opened his eyes, the glow of the stars within him reflected in his gaze. "It's not just strength," he replied calmly. "My body has changed, adapted. The meridians, they've shifted in a way that feels more natural." "Ah, so it wasn't just your core, then," she noted, leaping up onto his shoulder once again. "Your peculiar condition continues to surprise me." Lucavian chuckled softly, running a hand through his hair. "I can't say I'm disappointed by the results. The changes, they feel like they've brought everything into alignment." "So what now?" Vitaliera asked, her feline eyes narrowing as she observed him closely. Lucavian stood up, his body feeling lighter, more attuned to the world around him. The stars within his core spun steadily, their energy thrumming through his veins. He could feel the vast potential within him, ready to be unleashed. "Just as I said before, we can't have the fact my other core falling back. Can we?" he said, his voice calm. "And it is also the time when we find you a good meal, no?" Vitaliera purred softly, a satisfied sound, as she curled herself comfortably on his shoulder. "What do you mean?" Lucavian glanced at Vitaliera, an amused glint in his eyes. "Don't you remember what you told me?" he asked, his voice calm but teasing. Vitaliera tilted her head slightly, her feline gaze sharp with curiosity. "What are you talking about?" He chuckled softly. "Just like how I need to absorb death energy to strengthen my flame of equinox. You need to absorb potent life energy to recover your strength. You said it yourself." Vitaliera's eyes narrowed for a moment. Then she purred in acknowledgement, her tail flicking lightly. "Ah yes, I did mention that. I've been running a bit low on life energy, haven't I?" She stretched her body, her movements languid but deliberate. "So, have you found such a place for me to recover?" Then, Lucavian's smile widened, and he met her gaze with a glint of amusement. "Didn't I say we were going to eat a fish before we left Rakenshore?" Vitaliera blinked, a hint of confusion flickering in her eyes. "Yes, you did. But I don't see what—" She trailed off, her eyes widening slightly as the realization hit her. "That fish," Lucavian said, his voice calm and certain, "will be your meal." Vitaliera's initial confusion deepened as she processed Lucavian's words. "What kind of fish would allow me to absorb life energy?" she thought to herself. "Is there even a fish capable of that?" She glanced at Lucavian, her expression one of mild skepticism. But then, as the question lingered in her mind, something surfaced from the depths of her memory. "Wait, I remember now. A conversation from her past, something that had been mentioned by the elders of her sect. It was about two guardian beasts that resided in a forest on the west side of Thornridge, the city where she had stayed after losing Gerald. The elders had spoken in hushed tones of these creatures, beings tied to the essence of life itself. The elders of her sect had spoken of them in reverence, calling them the Tyax and Laxa, the inseparable fish spirits of the forest. Tyax, the life-bringer, was known to embody pure vitality. Its presence caused the forest to bloom with vibrant life, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of energy. The trees in its domain grew taller and stronger, the animals thrived, and even the water seemed clearer, purer. It was said that anyone who came in contact with Tyax's life energy could be revitalized, their strength restored, their wounds healed. But Laxa, the counterpart, was equally important. Laxa was the overseer of death, responsible for the natural decay and renewal of the forest. Where Tyax brought life, Laxa took the dying carcasses, drawing the last remnants of life energy from them and ensuring their return to the earth. Laxa represented the quiet, inevitable end, but it wasn't a force of destruction. It was the key to balance, allowing new life to thrive by managing the transition of the old. Together, Tyax and Laxa maintained the harmony of the forest, their energies interwoven in a delicate dance. They were inseparable, one constantly complementing the other in the natural cycle of life and death. They were more than mere creatures. They were the guardians of the very essence of the forest itself. The two fish spirits, Vitaliera thought, her eyes widening slightly. She had forgotten about them until now, but the memory flooded back in vivid detail. If Lucavian had found one of these guardian spirits, then the power it held would be immense. So it's Tyax, isn't it? She murmured, her tone soft yet filled with awe. Lucavian's smile widened slightly as he recalled the details from the novel, his eyes gleaming with knowledge. Yes, Tyax and Laxa are the rulers of Wraithshade Forest. They've existed here for centuries, maintaining the balance of life and death. Their power is immense, and the forest thrives or decays, based on their presence. Vitaliara's gaze sharpened, her curiosity piqued. You seem to know quite a bit about them, she noted, her voice carrying an edge of intrigue. Lucavian nodded. I do. In the story, after the male lead broke through the 5-star realm, the surge of power attracted the tribulation, and it also caught the attention of Tyax and Laxa. He thought inwardly, the memory of the novel's events playing vividly in his mind. They led him to their sacred domain, where a life-and-death battle took place, though, of course, he would not be able to tell Vitaliera about this. I came across the information somewhere. If you don't want to say it, say so. Haha. Lucavian's chuckle lingered in the air, but his gaze shifted, growing more serious. While the stories about them have been twisted over time, one thing remains clear, he began, his voice steady as he explained. Tyax and Laxa aren't ordinary creatures. They're Nyxoliths, a rare breed of monsters. Vitaliera tilted her head slightly as if she had remembered something. Nyxoliths? // G/. Lucavian nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yes, Nyxoliths are unique because each one embodies a specific elemental or spiritual force. Tyax has the life attribute, while Laxa governs death. Their powers are perfectly balanced, and together, they maintain the balance in their powers, and they can't live without the other. Those... Vitaliara's eyes widened as recognition flickered in her gaze. Those forks.